studying tonight from the 8th chapter of the book of Revelation. And as we concluded last week's lesson with chapter 8, verse 1, and when he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. We did make a few comments about the silence in heaven. However, this is one of the unanswered questions that we may have concerning Revelation, is what does the 30 minutes of silence represent? The Bible doesn't tell us plainly, but in studying the Word, it's easy to understand that this represents the awe of God when people stand in the presence of the Lord, and just before the last seal is opened, that I believe that it's the awe and the magnitude of the things that are going to take place on this earth. And it's also a time of expectancy when the people just stood back. You know, heaven was never quiet before this time. I don't believe it's quiet now. The Bible tells us, and we've studied previous chapters telling us about the angels that and the living creatures that are worshiping before the throne of God, crying holy and holy and worthy, and all of these things. But at this time everything ceases, and I believe that this could be compared to the calm before the storm. You know, it's like some of the storms, that natural storms of this life. You've seen the clouds rise on the horizon, the big thunderheads build up, or the big cloud bank come, and it begins to get dark, and all of a sudden it's so still that not a leaf moves. But it isn't long until the thunder begins to roll and the lightning begins to crash, and then the storm is in progress. I believe that this could be probably referred to as the calm before the storm, because the last seal is to be opened, and God's wrath is going to be poured out upon this world in a mighty way, in a way that has never been before. And so there's silence in heaven just waiting. I believe that after the opening of the first 6 seals that God poured out his judgments, but I don't believe that there's anything in the first 6 seals that compare with the things that are yet to be with the opening of the 7th seal. And so he said, I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense, which came with the prayers of the saints, ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar, and cast it into the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. And the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. Let's take a moment and talk about trumpets. The Bible, the entire Bible from beginning to end, talk about trumpets. Trumpets are announcing a happening. There was the trumpet, there was a voice that spoke on Mount Sinai when Moses went up on Mount Sinai to receive the 10 Commandments. There was a great voice spoke that actually shook the mountain, that the Bible describes it as being as a great trumpet. And when the children of Israel marched around Jericho, they blew the trumpets at the end of their march, and the walls of Jericho fell down. And throughout the Bible, trumpets represents the heralding of a great happening, of something that is about to happen. And so there were 7 angels which stood before God, and they were given 7 trumpets, and at the opening of the 7th seal. And I believe that probably all the inhabitants of heaven and John and even God himself had to pause for a few moments. The Bible says for the space of half an hour, just to get prepared, or just to get ready for the things that were going to take place. And he gave the angels, the 7 angels, 7 trumpets, and And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of the saints. Now in the book of Luke, he speaks of Gabriel standing at the altar of God and in the presence of God. And so these angels are not named here, but the 7 angels that sound are 7 angels that stand in the presence of God. This says which stood before God. In the King James translation, in the Greek translation, it says they stood in the presence of God. And so these were angels that were prepared for this duty at this time, that were living beings that were created of God, and they stood before him and before his throne and were given the 7 trumpets. Then he said another angel. So some believe that this could be Christ in his high priest work, but the censer is always mentioned in connection with the high priest, and there are other theories that have been taught along this line. But in the Bible, Gabriel is the one that stands at the altar of God, and Gabriel is one of the ministering angels that it's very possible it could have been him. We don't know. It just tells us here that another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of the saints. And so in this place, the last seal has just been loosed from the 7-seal book, followed by this great silence in heaven for half an hour. The wrath of God is going to be intensified, as we studied before, that the first 3½ years of the tribulation is called the lesser tribulation, when God is pouring out his wrath. But the last 3½ years, that all of the demons of hell are going to be loosed on this earth, and God is going to pour out his great wrath upon the inhabitants of the earth. And we refer to the last 3½ years of the tribulation as being the great tribulation. The wrath of God at this time is to be intensified, and there's nothing now. And I believe that God, another reason for the silence could be that God knew that there would never be a time like this. There never has been, and there will never be again a time when his wrath will be unleashed on the inhabitants of the earth, as it will be at the opening of the 7th seal. And so this is a time that there's absolutely nothing that can hold back the pouring out of God's wrath upon the earth. God is still sitting on his throne, and now 7 angels receive trumpets and are standing before God. When each angel sounds his trumpet, there will be a corresponding fulfillment of the wrath of God in the earth. Now we see another angel coming and standing at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints, and up on the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense, which came with the prayers of the saints, ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar, and cast it into the earth. And this is also translated up on the earth in other translations. As he cast it from heaven upon the earth, there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. And the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. And so the first trumpet, the Bible tells us in verse 7, the first trumpet sound, the first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood. They were cast upon the earth, and the third part of the trees was burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up. And the first trumpet, there was hail, fire, and blood. This will be a literal plague and will be similar to the 7th Egyptian plague. The only difference here is the addition of blood and the exception of animate life. If we compare this to the Egyptian plague in Exodus chapter 9, the Bible tells us that under that plague, that it was to destroy all green vegetation, and it was to strike, or the plague was to strike all men and beasts. There was blood shed, but at this time that it was given unto them not to touch those that had the The only difference here is the addition of blood, the exception of animate life. This plague will affect only vegetation and 1/3 of the earth, while in Egypt it affected vegetation, men, and beasts. And during this plague, agricultural progress will be impossible. According to one writer, there's been a modern instance of this plague. It is said that in 1921, in Yunnan, China, fire and hail mingled with blood fell over the countryside. But this was not the fulfillment of God's prophecy, because that is yet to come. There have been many instances throughout the world in the past years that similarities of the wrath of God have been shown, but yet that is not the wrath of God, because it is still to be poured out. And the plagues, the Egyptian plague, was similar to that which would be poured out in the last time. But we will look into this just a little bit farther. The plague that is poured out here, the first angel sounded. There followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth. The third part of the trees was burned up, and all green grass was burned up. According to the plague that the hail and fire mingled with blood that fell in Egypt, that the lightning fell, the fire fell from God, and it actually run along the ground, burning up all vegetation. And now look at the second trumpet, the second, in verse 8, the second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea became blood, and the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. I want you to notice here that he didn't say that it was a great mountain falling into the sea, but he said it as it were a great mountain. Sometimes words make just a little bit of difference. He didn't say that there was a mountain burning, but he said as it were a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea became blood. Now I want to stop and pause for just a moment and insert this, that we are preaching today that the wrath of God is going to be poured out upon this earth, but yet people harden their hearts. They will not hear the Word of God, and they have an attitude that I just don't really care what is going to happen in the last day. And there are many that explain it away. There are many teachers and preachers that explain the wrath of God away, the tribulation period. They tell us that the book of Revelation has been fulfilled or is being fulfilled right now. And the only thing that we're to look forward to is at the end of this age when Jesus comes to take his children to heaven, and that's all there is to look forward to. Then, I feel like they're deceived because they don't rightly divide the word of truth. Now, the wrath is going to be poured out. Now, most of us, I'm sure all of us, have heard about Mount St. Helen in, I believe, the state of Washington, where this volcano erupted, and there's more volcanoes there, and there's one in California that are just on the verge of erupting again. But there was one man that lived on this mountain who was a caretaker at a resort, and he had a nice home there. He lived there in this beautiful little home with 16 cats, and people warned him that this mountain was going to erupt. His name was Harry Truman. He wasn't the same one that was the president, however, but he said, I've been on this mountain for all my life, I believe the statement that he made, and he said this mountain wouldn't do this to old Harry. He made this statement, and that morning he got up, fixed his breakfast, bacon and eggs, and fed his 16 cats, and went out and started planting petunias in his flower bed, and the people were warning him to get away from the mountain because it was going to explode and everything in that area would be burned up. But he says, oh no, it won't happen to me. I've been here a long time, and this old mountain's my friend, and it just won't do this to old Harry. But at 8:31 that morning, the mountain erupted, and everything within hundreds of miles was affected by this. And I wonder how the mountain treated old Harry. I believe that he probably vaporized just instantly when the lava came across his house, along with all vegetation, with all animal life. Everything that was left on that mountain went up in vaporous smoke, and the mountain was covered. I believe there are people like this today that are saying that God is my friend and He won't do that to me. There are people saying that God is a God of love and He's not going to burn anybody. There are people that are saying this, and preachers that are preaching this, and they're preaching these doctrines that God is love and that everybody's going to be saved. Did you know that there are preachers that are preaching this doctrine, that no one is going to be lost, that everybody that lives on the face of this earth are going to be saved? The Bible doesn't teach that. The Bible teaches us to pray that we will be accounted worthy to escape the things coming on this earth. And he was talking about the wrath of God being poured out. And the hail, fire, and blood will be a literal plague, and it will be similar to the 7th Egyptian plague that was poured out when Moses went to Pharaoh and told him to let my people go. And Pharaoh hardened his heart, or God hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go. And so all of these plagues came on them until the children of Israel finally left Egypt and went out into the wilderness. But we won't get into that tonight. But during the Egyptian plague, it affected all the things on the earth. But during this plague, agricultural progress will be impossible. Do you know there will still be people trying to farm, trying to raise crops, and trying to go about their everyday business? But because of this plague, it will be impossible to do that. According to one writer, that this fire and hail mingled with blood fell in China, and even though that did happen there, that was not the fulfillment of this prophecy. When this fulfillment comes, it will make every hailstorm, every lightning storm, every storm that's ever been seen on this earth seem very mild, because this will be the great and terrible day of the Lord like has never been before. The second trumpet sounded, and as it were, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea. The third part of the sea became blood. The third part of the creatures which were in the sea had life died. The third part of the ships were destroyed. This mountain is evidently, I believe we talked about meteors last week, and these are God's creation also. And I believe that these stars, or meteors, or shooting stars as we call them, will take a part in the last day wrath of God. And what John actually saw was a great ball of fire as it fell into the sea. And to him, he said it looked like a great big mountain that was on fire that fell into the sea. The sea that he saw was no doubt the Mediterranean, because the events of the seals and the plagues of the trumpets and vials will be especially poured out upon the then known world. By then known, I mean the world that was known at the time that John wrote the book of Revelation. And the happenings that took place during the opening of the seals evolved around the countries which we refer to as the old Roman Empire. And he saw that this great mountain, as though it were a mountain burning with fire, fell into the sea, and 1/3 of the sea became blood, and 1/3 of the living creatures in the sea and on the sea will be destroyed. Now you notice I said on the sea, in the sea, and on the sea. And he said the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. And so that were those that were on the sea, those that were in ship. A third part of those were destroyed. A third part of the fish and the life that was in the waters, all of the marine life, a third part died and were destroyed. And so the mountain here that we're talking about is probably the big ball of fire, the meteor which God causes to fall into the sea, and it causes the sea to become blood, and 1/3 of the living creatures will be killed, 1/3 in the sea and on the sea will be destroyed, and also the business, the mariners, that the shipping business will be hindered by the obstruction, the great obstruction of the sea turning into blood. And at this time that men will actually begin to realize that the judgment of God is being poured out. The Bible tells us that this day will come, and it will come upon some people unaware, and they will not know about it until it is taking place, and they will begin to recognize that this is the wrath of God. I believe at the beginning of the wrath of God, there will be people so stubborn, there will be people so single-minded that they will not recognize any of this having to do with God or religion or the Bible, and they will continue to go on their own ways and try to make it regardless of what is happening on this earth. But the wrath of God is going to become so strong and so terrible that even the most wicked and vile men in this world will recognize that this is of God, and that God is beginning to pour out His wrath upon this earth. And there will be people, as Pharaoh was, that had their hearts hardened. Even though the plagues came on the earth, he would not recognize God. He would not recognize God's people, and neither would he soften his heart and let God's people go. I believe the stronger the wrath of God is poured out, the more that God's wrath is poured out, the more people will harden their hearts against God and will turn away from those who love God, the people of God that are on this earth at that time, and the wrath of God will be poured out against them. The third trumpet sounded, and when we look at the third trumpet, the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers, upon the fountains of waters, and the name of the star is called Wormwood, and the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. And so this is no doubt another meteor whose gaseous vapors will be absorbed by 1/3 of the waters of the rivers and fountains. They will become bitter as wormwood and cause men to die. In other words, when this falls into the waters, all waters, the streams, the wells, it says all waters will be absorbed. 1/3 of the waters will be absorbed by the gaseous vapors, the waters of the rivers and the fountains, and they will become bitter as wormwood and cause men to die. In other words, the water will be poisoned, and the men that drink these waters will die because of the poison. And do you know that you cannot live without water very long? You can live without food for quite a while. You know, the longest fast in the Bible is 80 days and 80 nights. We talk about Jesus fasting 40 days and 40 nights. Paul said, I fast often. And in Esther, the Bible tells us that she asked that her people fast for 3 days and 3 nights. If you've ever done any fasting, just a day or two will make you so hungry that you can eat anything. If you fast without water, then you would be willing to drink anything. You know, when we're not hungry, you know, we become picky about what we eat. And when we're not thirsty, well, we can let even the Dr. Pepper sit on the shelf if we're not very thirsty. And you know, the ad about, you know, on the TV that they just can't hold out for Dr. Pepper. Well, I'll tell you, if you fast for a few days, you'll be like the fellow that they show in the commercial that he finally gives in and drinks the Dr. Pepper. He'll become so thirsty. Now, in that day, these people will be so thirsty that they will drink the waters, even though they are bitter. Even then, they will not know that they're drinking to their devastation, and they will die, because you cannot live without water. Now, the Bible tells us that Moses fasted 40 days and 40 nights on Mount Sinai. He came down. The Bible doesn't tell us that he drank water again, but he confronted Aaron and the children of Israel. He became angry, threw the tablets down and broke them, And the God spoke to him and told him to return to the mountain. And he went back up on the mountain, and he fasted for 40 days and 40 nights again until he received the 10 commandments a second time, and he came back down. Now, I'm sure that Moses was thirsty. I'm sure that Jesus was thirsty when he fasted in the wilderness, because the Bible said the devil came along and tempted him and wanting him to take a drink. But the Lord just refused him and told him to get behind me. And he wanted him to eat. He told him, said, you can command these rocks to become bread. But, he said, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. And so men became so thirsty, they drank this bitter water, and they died. Wormwood is a perennial herb, which is very bitter, and it's used in the manufacture of absinthe. It was formerly used as a vermifuge. A vermifuge is a medicine used to expel worms or other animal parasites from the intestine. So this is a very bitter herb that he refers this to, but it actually wasn't an herb. It was the gaseous vapors from the star or the mountain that fell, which I believe that was possibly a meteorite that fell, and the gaseous vapors contaminated the waters, and men died. We're talking about the wrath of God being poured out. Now the fourth angel sounded. The sun, the moon, and stars were affected. The fourth angel sounded. The third part of the sun was smitten. The third part of the moon and the third part of the stars, and so as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. Now, these events are similar to what happened under the sixth seal, and what will happen under the fifth seal. I want you to remember this now. The events are similar to what happened under the sixth seal, and what is yet to happen under the pouring out of the fifth vial. The length of the time of the darkness is not known, but it cannot be long, because in the very next trumpet, the sun that has been darkened by the smoke of the abyss, or it's darkened again. In other words, it has become normal and is ready to be darkened one more time. And so here he says that the sun, the moon, stars are affected. The events are similar, but the length of the time of the darkness it doesn't tell, but it's I believe it's just there and it's gone. For he said the sun was smitten, the third part of the moon, the third part of the stars, and so as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part, and the night likewise. In other words, when he says the night likewise, this means the sun, and it's the moon and the stars. The day and the night alike was affected by this. And so it says the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. And so this is similar to the happening of the sixth seal, and under the fifth vial it will become dark again. This judgment corresponds to the ninth Egyptian plague of darkness, which lasted for 3 days. And in Exodus chapter 10, verses 21 and 23, he talks about darkness being on the earth, and he talks about it being such a darkness that it could be felt. Have you ever been in such a dark place that the darkness surrounds you, that you can just feel the darkness? You can open your eyes as wide as you want to, but you cannot see a thing. In other words, the blackest of black. The Bible told us, I believe in our last lesson, he was talking about it being as black as the sackcloth of hair. This was the only way that he could describe it. But Exodus talks about darkness being so dark that you could feel the darkness. And we'll go ahead and look now. There's an announcement in verse 13. He said, I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the three angels which are yet to sound. And the announcement given here of the three woes, the judgments heralded by the fifth, sixth, and seventh trumpets are so horrible that an angel flies through the midst of heaven, crying, Woe to the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the three angels which are yet to sound. In other words, the three that are yet to sound are so great that God has to send angels to cry out woe unto the inhabitants, because the greatness and the greatness of the wrath is going to be intensified even more. And so he said, the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. Now the star that will fall to the earth from heaven is not a literal star, but an intelligent being, as it is very clear to understand. For he said that he saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and to them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. And as it said, it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have the seal of God in their foreheads. And to them it was given that they should not kill, but they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. They had the hair as hair of women, their teeth were as the teeth of lions. They had breastplates as it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. And they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon. And in both instances here, in the Hebrew and the Greek, both of these words mean the destroyer, the one that comes to destroy. And the 12th verse says, One woe is past, and behold, there come 2 woes more hereafter. And so the star that fell is not a meteorite, nor is it a literal star that we see in the heaven, but is an intelligent being, as it is clear here, due to the fact that personal pronouns and personal acts are ascribed to it. Only an intelligent being can be given a key and command to open the door of the pit. Satan's angels are referred to as stars. It is clear that the angel fell from heaven right there before John in the vision, and indicates that he will actually fall from heaven in the tribulation period, the very moment the 5th trumpet sounds. When the angel has opened the abyss, the bottomless, which is the bottomless pit, smoke will come out of it as the smoke of a great furnace, which will darken the sun and the air. It can be seen that since the darkening of the sun, the moon, and stars under the 4th trumpet, they have returned to normal again. Out of the smoke came forth demon locusts upon the earth, and to them was given power, even as the scorpions of the earth have power to cause torment when he strikes a man. The smoke indicates the abyss is a place of fire, and these are not ordinary locusts, but this is the dwelling place, I believe, of the unclean spirits, or the devil's angels, which were cast out and which are bound unto the day of judgment. I believe that they will be loosed. These are demon spirits that will be loosed in that day. And these are not ordinary locusts, because they will eat no vegetable products. And they have a king, and ordinary locusts do not have a king. They are not stifled by the smoke, nor burned by the fire of the pit. And their very description proves them to be different. They arise from the infernal regions. Ordinary locusts do not. They are indestructible and are not mortal, else men would not fear them. The demon locusts of the abyss are literal because the language proves them to be. God has always sent literal plagues and woes. The grass, herbs, and trees which they are commanded not to hurt are literal. If this was not a literal plague, there would be no need for this commandment. And the smoke, the fire, and etc. literal, so the locusts must be literal. They are intelligent because they receive commands from God to hurt those men who have not the seal of God in the foreheads. And all other men they torment in the same literal and physical way as natural scorpions do. The sting of a scorpion is exceeding painful for several hours, but is seldom fatal. Their objects of sight for men will flee from them and will seek death in preference to contact with them. Their description proves that they're literal. They are winged creatures like war horses with crowns of gold, faces of men, hair of women, teeth of lions, breastplates of iron, stinging tails of scorpions. They will be innumerable and make a thunderous noise as only literal creatures do. And when we look at the description here, he said the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle. The horses represent swiftness. Horses prepared for battle, that means that they will progress speedily across the land. The ordinary locust, the plague of the locust that came to the Egyptians, moved very slow. And they not only moved slow, but they were so thick that when they would rise up, they would hide the sun and it would become dark. And this is a type of the locust, but this is a different type locust. These are probably larger than the locusts which were under the plague. The locusts that we read about in our commentaries are about 4 inches long. They are similar to the grasshopper. They move very slow across fields, and they leave nothing behind. They enter into houses and even eat the woodwork from the walls of the houses. And they just strip everything bare. And while they're moving, they make a noise, and it sounds like the noise of rain as they're moving across the land. But this tells us that these move swift because they're likened to horses prepared unto battle. And on their heads were crowns of gold. The crowns of gold represent authority or power or kings or conquerors. And so the crowns that he saw represented them as having power upon their head to go forth and to conquer. And their faces were as the faces of men. The faces of men represent intelligence. They were intelligent beings because they were able to receive commandments. They were able to distinguish those who had the mark upon their foreheads, the seal of God, and those who had not been sealed. And so they were intelligent enough to know which had been sealed and which had not been sealed. The faces of men therefore represent intelligence. They had hair as the hair of women, and the hair represents power. And if you will look back into the Bible, the vow of the Nazarite was that they would not receive a razor. Their hair was not to be cut. And we look at the power of Samson, and so the hair as of women represents the devastating power in which these locusts would have, and their teeth were as teeth of lions. The teeth of lions represents the ravening power of the lions, that they were able to destroy things that got in their past. And the breastplates were as breastplates of irons. In other words, it would do no good to go against them, because their breastplate meant that they could not be penetrated, and so they could not reach them because they were protected by breastplates. And the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. In other words, this sound of chariots of many horses running to battle represents that they were not secret in challenging the inhabitants of the earth, but they were very noisily came against all powers and authority. That means against the government, against every religion, against every power that existed on the earth. In other words, they stood up mightily and proudly and opposed the powers that were being on the face of the earth at that time, because it said they were as many horses running to battle, and they had tails like unto scorpions, and they were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. Now there is one verse of Scripture found in Isaiah chapter 9, verses 14 and 15. Isaiah 9, 14 and 15. He said, "Therefore the Lord will cut off from Israel head and tail, branch and rush in one day. The ancient and honorable, he is the head, and the prophet that teacheth lies, he is the tail." And so this tells us that the tail that has power to sting what came from the false prophet. For he said here in the 15th verse that the prophet that teacheth lies is the tail. And remember, during all of this time, that the Antichrist is trying to deceive every man, woman, boy, and girl on the face of the earth. And so there were stings in his tail, and the power was to hurt men 5 months. However, these were literal stings and literal scorpions, and the Bible tells us that they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, which is in the Hebrew tongue. He tells us his name was Abaddon, in the Greek Apollyon, and this is the name of the one that has that came out of the bottomless pit, or the one who we call the destroyer. He said, "One woe is past, and there are yet 2 woes." The 6th angel sounded. I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar which is before God, saying to the 6th angel which had the trumpet, "Loose the 4 angels which are bound in the river Euphrates." The 4 angels bound in the Euphrates are fallen angels, because good angels, or the angels of God, are never bound, but the bad angels are bound. And these 4 angels were loosed from the river Euphrates, and they become the leaders over the 200 million demon horsemen of the locust, who will be loosed out of the abyss after the plague of the demon locust is finished, or the horsemen, and they are prepared there for an hour, a day, and a month, and a year. This simply means that they will not keep on killing people over a long period of time, but will slay men at a given point in time, as the firstborn in Egypt were slain on the night of the Passover. Now, he talks about the 200,000 horsemen. He said he heard the number of them, and he saw the horses of the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire, jacinth, and brimstone, and the heads of the horses as the heads of lions. Out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. By these 3 was the 3rd part of men killed, by the fire, by the smoke, by the brimstone which issued out of their mouth. For their powers in their mouth and in their tails. For their tails were like unto serpents, and had heads, and with them they do hurt. The points above under the demon locusts, which prove that they're real, literal, indestructible demon creatures, also prove the horsemen are the same nature, from the same place, for the same purpose of bringing woe upon mortal creation. However, these horsemen will kill men, while the locusts merely tormented them. The general appearance of these demons will be that of horses, having heads like lions, and out of their mouth will issue fire, smoke, brimstone, which will be the 3 causes of death of men in this plague. And they also have tails like serpents, with heads at the end of them. With them they do hurt. The riders of the horse have breastplates of fire, jacinth, and brimstone. The second will really be 3 plagues in one. The terms these 3 and these plagues of Revelation 9, 18, and 20 refer to the fire, smoke, and brimstone. And he said the third part of men, at least 1/3 of the Roman Empire at that time, will be affected by this plague. If not, and I believe that probably that 1/3 of the entire earth will be affected by these plagues. Approximately 98 million will be slain by these horsemen if the territory is limited by the boundaries of the old Roman Empire. And a much greater number will be slain than 98 million if it includes the entire earth. The men who escape death will still refuse to renounce their vile sins and accept God and repent. However, personally, I believe that every plague, every vial, every trumpet that sounds, everything that takes place during the tribulation period will have an effect upon the entire earth to a certain degree. I believe that all flesh, that all manner of human life, beasts of the field, the fowls of the air, the fish of the sea, everything that's on the face of this earth will be affected to a certain extent by what takes place during the outpouring of the wrath of God during the tribulation period. For he tells us here that by these 3, the third part of men were killed, and by the fire and the smoke and the brimstone. And he said their powers in their mouth and in their tails, and for their tails were likened to serpents and had heads. With them they do hurt. And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of the